The containment room was supposed to be secure. It had reinforced walls, a neutral gravity field, and an ambient light setting calibrated to prevent psychological overstimulation. Yet somehow, the calmest room aboard the UAS Diligence had become an arena of pure confusion. Is he swelling? Asked Vyerks, a blue-skinned student intern from the planet Kesh, eyes wide as he glanced at the readout on his wristband. No, said Reedy, a tall, leaf-colored trainee from Zarul Theta. His cardiovascular system is just overcompensating. Probably. Erwin Teller stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, his shirt damp with sweat. His brown hair stuck to his forehead, and his expression shifted between hunted and annoyed. Okay, Erwin said, lifting his hands slowly. I just need like 5 minutes, maybe 6. You all talk too loud, the lights are weird, and I haven't eaten in 11 hours. Reedy inched closer, holding a small glowing cube that emitted soft tones meant to soothe aggression. Please, Erwin, let the harmonics stabilize your neural activity. We calibrated it for your species' auditory range. Erwin blinked at the cube, took 2 steps backward, and yelled, "That thing sounds like an ice cream truck having a seizure." Vyerks flinched and dropped his translator tablet. Okay, that was unexpected, muttered Reedy. Erwin turned toward the observation window, where a half-dozen alien researchers watched with evident concern. I told you I was fine when you woke me up, Erwin said, pointing. You dragged me out of cryo because you detected elevated stress markers. That's just how I wake up, Reedy glanced at Vyerks. Was there a mistake in the biometric interpretation? I thought the heart rate was, it was 128. That's jogging pace. I thought humans jogged at 90. Erwin dropped onto a bench and covered his face with both hands. I was dreaming about waffles. I was halfway through cutting the second one when you beamed me out of the chamber. Everyone fell silent. A waffle dream? Asked Vyerks. Yes, Erwin said, muffled. And now I'm stuck in a bright room surrounded by aliens trying to check me with singing cubes. There was a long pause before Reedy said, he might be experiencing post-cryo disorientation. That can lead to erratic behavior, and Erwin yawned long and hard, rubbing his eyes with the palms of his hands. Sorry, he said, voice sluggish. Just tired. Vyerks and Reedy froze. Erwin looked up. What? You're not in distress? Reedy asked cautiously. No, I'm exhausted, Erwin said. I had to stay up 48 hours before the cryopod so my metabolism would sync right. I haven't eaten, I'm lightheaded, and you guys are treating me like I'm a bomb with legs. Reedy slowly turned off the harmonics cube. We thought you were in emotional collapse, Vyerks said. The data, your blood pressure, temperature, muscle tension, it all suggested a breakdown. I stubbed my toe getting out of the pod. Vyerks looked like he had just witnessed the collapse of a star. Erwin stood, wobbling slightly. Look, is there coffee on this ship, or something close to coffee? I need caffeine, protein, and a dark room, preferably in that order. Reedy turned to the wall and tapped a sequence into a panel. I'll request a stimulant-compatible beverage and nutrient paste from the galley. Paste, Erwin repeated, standard nourishment. Fully balanced, thermally neutral. I'd like something chewable, please. The door hissed open, and a short, rust-colored alien with a bulbous head entered. Status report. Reedy turned. Erwin is not frenzied. He is merely experiencing fatigue and mild hunger. The newcomer looked Erwin up and down. He crushed 2 auxiliary monitors and disabled a magnetic scan array. That was an accident, Erwin said. I thought it was a door. You threw a chair at the biometric scanner. It buzzed at me like a fly. You threatened to dismantle the translator system. It kept calling me Earth-originated mammal like I was a raccoon. The rust-colored alien turned to Reedy. How long until he stabilizes? I believe he already has. I'm standing right here, Erwin said, and I told you, I just need food and sleep. The alien ignored him and walked out. I've been awake for 11 minutes, Erwin muttered. I've caused an international incident in 11 minutes. Reedy's wristband pinged. Food's ready in the galley, I'll escort you. Erwin followed, his gait uneven. This ship's gravity feels weird. It's at 0.9 Earth norm, Vyerks said from behind. We thought a slight reduction would reduce your strain. Erwin stumbled. It's like walking on a mattress. You're making me work harder to stay upright. Reedy frowned. That contradicts our model. Yeah, well, your model clearly didn't factor in sleep-deprived crankiness. They reached the galley, a wide chamber with hexagonal booths and glowing panels that dispensed meals. Reedy tapped in a code and retrieved a tray containing a steaming mug and a rectangular slab of something brown. "What's this?" Erwin asked, pointing to the slab. "Protein loaf. Composed of molecularly aligned amino chains, seasoned with tastes like carpet," Erwin muttered after a bite. "But better than nothing." He downed the drink in 3 gulps, blinked, and then sighed. "Okay, that's better," Reedy leaned forward. "Do humans often exhibit violent confusion post-cryo?" "No," Erwin said. "We usually just feel like garbage for a few hours." "The violence only happens when you interrupt waffle dreams." Vierks looked thoughtful. "We'll update the protocols. I'd appreciate that." For the next 15 minutes, Erwin sat quietly, eating while Reedy and Vierks asked increasingly detailed questions about human metabolism, REM cycles, and breakfast customs. Erwin answered most of them between chews. Then, as he reached for his second mug, the ship lurched violently. The 3 of them grabbed onto the table as a low hum filled the room. "What was that?" Erwin asked. "Unexpected acceleration," said Reedy. "We're not scheduled for any maneuvers." The intercom crackled. "All personnel to stations. Unknown vessel approaching. Non-standard configuration. Possible distress signal." Reedy stood. "We have to go." "Where?" Erwin asked. "Medical bay. Protocol requires all non-crew to remain secured during alerts." "I just sat down," Erwin muttered, standing slowly. They moved through the corridors as the ship began to shift again, more violently this time. "What kind of ship did they say was approaching?" Erwin asked. "Unknown," said Vierks, "but it's large, bigger than this one." The lights dimmed, flickered, then returned. "Not a good sign," Erwin said flatly. When they reached the medical bay, a force field sealed behind them. Reedy tapped into the local console. "Ship is holding position," he said. "It's not responding to hails." "Could be a trap," Erwin said. Vierks looked at him. "We prefer to assume non-hostile intent." "Good luck with that." Minutes passed before the ship shuddered again. This time, Reedy's console lit up with red glyphs. "Something just docked with us," he said, his voice tense. Erwin stood, his pulse rising again. "You sure it's not just a really enthusiastic waffle delivery?" From down the corridor came the sound of tearing metal. Erwin turned slowly to Reedy. Still assuming non-hostile intent, Reedy didn't answer. The lights went out. A moment later, the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the corridor in pale blue. Then a shape appeared vaguely humanoid but too tall, too thin, and moving with an unnatural smoothness. Vierks backed up, nearly tripping over a med cart. "That is not a standard life form." "No kidding," Erwin whispered. The thing turned toward them, paused, then began moving faster. Reedy activated a containment field between them and the corridor. The creature slammed into the barrier, its limbs elongating briefly upon impact. Erwin swallowed. "So, do we have a plan B?" Reedy didn't answer. He was too busy watching the containment field flicker. It was weakening. Erwin stepped back, looking around the room for anything he could use. A tray, a scanner, a stool. He grabbed the stool. The creature screeched. Then the lights failed again, and the field collapsed. The creature stepped into the room with a sound like wet plastic peeling off glass. Erwin gripped the stool tighter, shifting his weight. "It doesn't have a face," he muttered. "It has sensors," Reedy said, pulling Vierks behind a storage console. "Multi-spectrum. I think it's analyzing us." "It can analyze this," Erwin said, and hurled the stool with all the strength a barely fed, under-rested human could muster. It hit the creature dead center. Instead of flinching or staggering, the thing absorbed the impact, the metal legs sinking briefly into its torso before popping out again with a squelch. "That's new," Erwin said, backing away. The creature tilted its upper half. Not its head, there wasn't one, but the whole top portion of its body twisted toward him, as if recalibrating its interest. "It's choosing targets," said Vierks from the floor. "Why is it choosing him?" "Maybe because I threw furniture at it," Erwin whispered. The emergency lighting flickered again. The thing made a low, oscillating sound, like a reversed heartbeat, and moved forward. Its limbs retracted slightly, streamlining into knife-edge shapes. "Erwin, move," Reedy shouted, But Erwin didn't run. He watched the floor, instead watched the reflection of the creature in the polished tile. It wasn't synced with the thing's movement. The reflection lagged. "It's projecting an image," he said. "It's not standing where it looks like it is." Reedy's eyes darted to the floor. "You're right." Erwin Dove left just as the real creature lunged from the other side of the room, its extended limbs slicing the air where he had been. The false image stayed in place, shimmering slightly. Vierks yelped as a cabinet toppled behind him, scattering instruments across the floor. Reedy tapped his wristband and spoke rapidly in his native tongue. Nothing responded. "Internal comms are down," he said. "We're cut off." Erwin scrambled toward the cabinet, grabbed what looked like a surgical torch and tested the button. A focused beam of orange light hissed out. "Okay," he said, "I've got a laser scalpel." "That's not rated for defensive use," Vierks said. "Neither is a stool, and I tried that already." The creature hissed again and split into two. For a moment, Erwin thought it had replicated, but then he saw the shimmer another projection. One of them moved toward Vierks. "Reedy," Erwin shouted. Reedy shoved Vierks aside and launched a metal tray at the projection. It passed through, confirming it wasn't real. "That means this one is," Erwin said and jabbed the scalpel forward. The beam hit the creature's side. It actually flinched and recoiled with a noise like grinding teeth. "It's vulnerable to thermal energy," Reedy said. "The internal temperature shift disrupted its cohesion." "Then find me a bigger laser," Erwin said. Reedy ran to a wall unit and yanked open a panel. Behind it, a backup sterilization emitter sat dormant. "Help me reroute power," Reedy said. "Manual override." Erwin dropped the scalpel and rushed over. "Which one's the ground?" "The black conduit." "They're all black." The creature surged again, this time faster. Vierks ducked under a counter, curled into a shaking ball. Erwin yanked two cables together. Sparks flew. The emitter hummed to life, vibrating the floor tiles. "Now," Reedy shouted. Erwin turned the emitter toward the center of the room and slammed the activation panel. A wide band of ultraviolet energy sprayed out, catching both projections and the real creature. The projections dissolved instantly. The real one convulsed, limbs retracting violently, skin bubbling. Then it collapsed into a puddle of semi-translucent goo that sizzled and began to evaporate. None of them spoke for several seconds, then Vierks stood up slowly. "I believe I wet myself." Erwin sat down against the wall. "I believe I burned off my eyebrows." Reedy checked the emitter. "It's fused. We can't use it again." "Let's hope we don't have to," Erwin said. The room filled with the faint scent of scorched plastic and something else, iron and ozone. A distant thud echoed through the corridor. "That wasn't the only one," Reedy said. Erwin groaned. "Of course it wasn't." They left the medbay and moved cautiously through the corridor. The lights flickered every few seconds and faint hissing sounds echoed from vents. "I think they're inside the ship's ventilation," Reedy said. "Spreading." "How many of those things got in?" Erwin asked. "We don't know." "The ship's internal sensors are offline. Let me guess, deliberately disrupted, most likely." A junction ahead of them crackled and sparked. The emergency shielding had failed, melting into slag. On the other side, two crew members lay unconscious. One of them twitched. Erwin rushed forward and knelt beside the nearest one. She was breathing, pulse thready, but there. "Looks like neural shock," he said. "Eyes are dilated, skin's dry, no burns." Reedy scanned her with a handheld device. "Her cerebral activity is minimal. She's in a synthetic coma. Probably induced by touch. So those things can shut you down without killing you, which means they're collecting." Erwin looked up sharply. "What? If they wanted to eliminate us, they'd use lethal force. This is containment." "For what?" Reedy didn't answer. Vierks crouched beside the second crew member. "This one's the navigation officer. Her keycard's still attached." Erwin took it. "Then we're going to the bridge." Reedy hesitated. "We're not authorized." "We're being hunted by faceless jelly assassins," Erwin said. "I'm done waiting for permission." They moved quickly now, sticking to maintenance corridors where the lighting still worked. The ship groaned around them as if the hull itself were resisting the invasion. They reached the command deck 30 minutes later. The main door had been welded shut from the outside. Erwin tapped the access panel. "They sealed themselves in, or someone else did," Reedy said. "The card didn't work." Erwin stared at the panel, then looked at the access seam. Do you have a cutting tool? Reedy handed over a vibrasaw. Erwin started slicing through the seam, sparks flying. I used to be a field engineer before I joined the lunar program, he said. Lost 2 fingertips to one of these. Do you require gloves? Not if I keep my hands where they belong. 10 minutes later, the door clanged open. The bridge was dark, save for the dim glow of internal monitors. 4 crew members were slumped over their consoles, motionless. Same coma state, Vyerk said after a scan. No injuries, no sign of struggle. Erwin moved to the helm and brought up the nav screen. The unidentified ship was still docked, no signals, no movement. Then something changed. The console flickered and displayed a new image, a series of concentric symbols pulsing gently. What's that? Erwin asked. Reedy leaned in. Not a language I recognize. It's a countdown, Vyerk said. Look at the diminishing intervals. Erwin stared. How long? Less than an hour. Erwin turned to Reedy. They're not here to attack, they're waiting for something. Reedy's eyes narrowed. Or someone. Erwin sat down in the command chair. Then we figure out what, and fast. Because if that timer hits 0 and something worse comes through, I'm not throwing another stool. Erwin tilted the command chair back, just slightly, and rubbed his temples. The bridge smelled faintly of overheated plastic and something else, something sharp and metallic that clung to the air like a memory. He glanced at the countdown on the central display. 41 minutes left. You said those things weren't killing anyone, he said. But none of these people are waking up. Reedy adjusted the monitor closest to the helm, pulling up a bioscan overlay of the unconscious crew. Their neural pathways are intact, but there's a suppression field of some kind. It's not chemical. More like a dampening frequency. So something broadcasted a brain nap to half your command team. Essentially, yes. Erwin leaned forward and tapped his fingers against the console housing. Let me guess your ship isn't equipped to reverse a frequency like that. Reedy's head crested slightly in what Erwin had come to recognize as something between frustration and embarrassment. No, we weren't anticipating this form of incursion. Of course not. Why plan for shape-shifting space blobs with built-in sleep mode? Vyerk, who had been standing by the rear systems panel, turned around. There's still no external communication. The docking link is sealed. Whatever they're here for, they're not sharing. Erwin stood and paced in a tight loop. Let's assume they're not just collecting bodies. Let's assume they're waiting for a response or a signal. From where? Reedy asked. Maybe Earth, Erwin said. Maybe us, maybe something we're not supposed to trigger. Vyerk's eyes flickered. The countdown. You think it's a trigger? I think it's a deadline, Erwin said. They're giving us a window. Do you have any kind of broadcast override, something that can reach through their interference? Only the emergency beacon, Reedy said. But it's not designed for two-way communication. Doesn't need to be, Erwin said. We just need to tell them something that makes them back off. And what would that be? We have no common language, no shared protocol. Our attempts at communication have received 0 response. Erwin looked down at his hands. The skin on his palm was still red where he'd gripped the hot emitter casing earlier. Then we don't talk to them, we show them. Reedy blinked. You want to demonstrate something? Yes, Erwin said. Something they'll understand. He turned to Vyerk. You said they didn't kill anyone, right? Correct. And they didn't try to break anything except what got in their way. Also correct. So they're trying to operate within limits. That means they're testing us or watching for something. Reedy's jawline flexed. You think this is a simulation, maybe, or a quarantine. Maybe they're waiting to see how we respond to a threat we can't fully fight. Then what would demonstration accomplish? Erwin walked over to the wall panel near the primary engineering console. I need access to the environmental systems. Why? Because I'm going to make it very uncomfortable in here for everyone. Vyerk recoiled slightly. That seems unwise. We're already under duress. Exactly, Erwin said. And if there's one thing humans do better than anyone else, Reedy interrupted. It's overreacting in unpredictable ways under duress. Erwin grinned without humor. Exactly. He keyed in a manual override and adjusted the temperature up by 20 degrees Celsius. Then he tweaked the oxygen ratio. Not dangerously, just enough to make it feel heavier. He dimmed the lighting to a pulsing red and activated a low-level vibration through the deck plating. Within seconds, the bridge felt like a furnace. Sweat gathered under Erwin's collar. Reedy staggered slightly, adjusting his balance. "This is highly destabilizing," Reedy said. "Good," Erwin replied. Then he triggered the internal alarm. A shrill, rising tone punctuated by irregular static bursts began echoing through the ship's corridors. It wasn't a real emergency tone, it was improvised, distorted, and just dissonant enough to make it feel wrong. "Now," Erwin said, "we see who shows up." 10 minutes passed. The heat became oppressive. Vyerk sat on the floor, panting softly. Reedy leaned against a console, his skin dulling slightly from its usual vibrant hue. Erwin remained standing, blinking sweat from his eyes. At minute 12, something moved on the display. The foreign ship shifted, barely perceptible at first, but then undeniable. A section of its hull retracted like a blooming flower, and from within, a figure emerged, not one of the glistening things they'd fought earlier. This one was different, tall like the others, but with a defined shape. A head, arms, legs. It walked with purpose through the docking channel. Erwin killed the alarm and reset the environment systems to normal. The bridge cooled within moments. Everyone breathed easier. Then the figure stepped onto the bridge. It was humanoid, but not human. Its skin was a shade between copper and obsidian, with faint pulses of internal light running beneath its surface like erratic veins of lava. It wore no suit, no armor, just a single sash made of something that shimmered like water. It looked at each of them in turn, then settled its gaze on Erwin. "You are the variable," it said. Its voice was low and modulated, like a string instrument being bowed through a speaker. Erwin didn't blink. "Yeah, seems to be the case." The being stepped closer. "You altered the ship's environment in a way that decreased its operational efficiency." "Correct. You impaired your own comfort." "Also correct, to provoke a response." "Yes," the being paused. "This behavior is not aligned with self-preservation." "Nope," Erwin said. "But it is aligned with problem-solving." The being tilted its head. "Explain." Erwin pointed to the unconscious crew. "You came here and started shutting everyone down, no warning, no communication. You triggered a lockdown and waited for us to do something." "So I did something. You destabilized the vessel." "I destabilized the situation," Erwin corrected. "Because if you're running a test, you don't want routine. You want to see how we react when nothing works." The being's internal lights pulsed brighter. "You perceive this as a test. If it wasn't, we'd all be dead." Another pause. The being turned to Reedy. "This one initiated containment," Reedy nodded. "We believed the human was experiencing a breakdown. Incorrect." "Yes. We have updated our understanding." The being stepped to the central console and placed a hand on it. The countdown vanished. "You have satisfied the threshold for adaptive response." "That's a fancy way of saying we passed," Erwin said. "Yes. Why test us?" The being looked at him. "Because others will not." Erwin's brow furrowed. "Others. There are entities in this region of space that do not assess. They consume. We are not among them." Reedy's eyes widened. "You're warning us." The being nodded once. "This vessel will depart. The affected crew will recover. No further action is required." "Wait," Erwin said. "Why not just tell us this in the first place?" The being's lights dimmed. "Because communication is not understanding. You understand now." Then it turned and walked back through the corridor, disappearing into the docking channel. A few minutes later, the foreign ship detached. No sound, no light, just a shift in presence, and then it was gone back on the bridge. The unconscious crew began to stir. One by one, their eyes opened. Confused but alive, Reedy exhaled slowly. "They're going to ask what happened." Erwin sat down in the command chair again, wiping sweat from his brow. "Tell them we passed a pop quiz." Vyerk stood shakily. "I don't think I want to be in the next class." Erwin leaned back, finally letting the chair take his weight. "Then you better hope the real test never shows up." No one spoke after that. There wasn't anything left to say, and for the first time since waking up, Erwin felt genuinely tired. Not the kind that came from cryo or stress, but the kind that let him close his eyes and sleep.